Let's go back to 2015, back when this reporter was breaking this poor 4-year-old's tiny little heart, and the DAB just started to get introduced. In that very same era, Google gave us hidden technical debts of machine learning systems, in which they proposed the fact that machine learning systems, although great and providing a lot of instant gratification in terms of financial benefits for companies that could utilize them effectively, there was also a lot of technical debt that was being incurred because the systems that were managing these models were either non-existent or very inefficient. To add to that, they happen to point out the fact that oftentimes these systems that did manage these ML models were often the bulk of the actual ML system, and the ML model itself was actually a very small component. And you can see here in this graphic from said paper where they were demonstrating the size of the code of the ML model based on all of the other code required to even manage that ML code, and just the size difference and the amount of complexity required just to, again, manage this one ML model. And this kind of spurred a new area or new discipline in terms of MLOps and the actual management and deployment of machine learning systems to kind of explode over the last about 5 or 6 years. Since then, we've seen startups like Datarobot and H2O.ai, as well as Azure ML, Kubeflow, MLflow, and just a host of other startups and cloud service providers who are now providing some sort of machine learning infrastructure and not just purely the machine learning models as a service as they were probably a few years ago. And looking back at my own experience, I haven't really re-examined my knowledge of machine learning for the last about 3 to 4 years since, again, MLOps started becoming so popular. So I wanted to take a moment for myself just to kind of examine what's been going on over the past couple of years and what I can learn in terms of MLOps, the different tools that they have. And the truth of the matter is there's a lot of knowledge to try to grasp. So I did what I always do whenever I try to learn anything, which is I created some form of roadmap of lots of online resources that I'm going to use to break down all the things I would like to learn in the next about 6 to 8 weeks in terms of MLOps. So for the roadmap, here are the 6 things I'm going to review in order to improve my knowledge of MLOps and where things are going. First, I'm going to start with reviewing the math for data science and ML because I have, again, not really covered that over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm sure I'm very lacking in those areas at this point, so it's just good to review that stuff all the time because it's really easy to forget. And I'm going to end up creating some note cards that I'll share with you guys so you guys can kind of see what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to learn in terms of every section of this roadmap. And after that, I'm going to review Docker and deploying machine learning models using Docker, just because that's still, I think, some ways that people are utilizing in terms of how they deploy machine learning models, followed by looking at things like Kubeflow, Azure ML, and then Datarobot. And that's going to be my general roadmap. And I'm going to break down all of those things here in the next few minutes as we're going to dive into my machine learning roadmap that I've put together, the different courses and articles that I've kind of collected. So that way you can see what I'm doing, as well as I'm going to share it with you guys so you can follow along with me over the next few weeks as I'm trying to dig into this whole new concept that I, again, haven't spent a lot of time doing because I've been working and consulting so much. So with that, let's dive into this and let's see what I am going to try to learn over the next few weeks. So let's dive right into my MLOps learning plan. Like I said, we're going to start with me reviewing math concepts, just because, again, great place to always start, because it's so easy to forget even basic things. In fact, when I was studying for the GRE, there are so many basic like geometry concepts that I forgot that required me to like re-go over things that I learned in like 4th grade, because at a certain point you just stop using certain concepts, and then if it's not right on top of your brain, you kind of just end up popping that right out of your stack, and then you forget everything. And you're wondering why you can't remember basic geometry rules, such as things that deal with angles, and how to find the area of slightly more complex shapes than a simple square. In that same way, that's why I wanted to put this first. And personally, to start out with, I think I found a great course for this, which is just on Coursera. It's the Mathematics for Data Science. It's actually pretty intense because it's a little more than just one course. This is more of like a specialization. So if you scroll down, you'll actually find a ton of different sections here. One, you'll find discrete mathematics and analyzing social graphs, which will be pretty in-depth as it is. And then a few other sections as well. Again, I'll probably end up speed watching a lot of this and just taking down a ton of notes and creating, again, some sort of short note cards so that way I can remember at least a high level in terms of math concepts or get that refreshed before I go too deep into other concepts that deal with machine learning. So I'm excited to review discrete mathematics because I haven't looked at it for 5 years. So I'm curious to see what this course will cover. I'm sure it'll be a lot of refreshers, but overall, again, it's just interesting to me. Some of these other things like calculus, I'm not a huge fan of. Just, some of us like it, some of us don't. On the flip side of me disliking calculus, I actually really am excited to redo kind of probability theory. Personally, that's something I've always enjoyed, trying to think about probability of certain actions happening, whether that be me trying to think about how I should invest because I'm basing some weird probabilities on it, which is probably all in my head, but it's just a fun way to kind of think about why I would pick one company versus another. So again, I'm going to be, I think, psyched for that class. So course 2 and 3, I'm not as psyched for, but I think course 1 and 4 are the 2 courses I'll be interested in kind of diving into, learning a little bit more about these courses and what I need to get refreshed in them. Now going back to the learning plan, my next focus will be on practical statistics for data scientists. So I'm curious to see what they've got here. It's actually a little more applied in terms of like applying that mathematics and statistics using things like R and Python. So I'm curious to see what will be inside this book. I only am going to have insight based on the ratings, which don't seem terrible. So I'm curious to see what's inside. You know, is it worth my time? So I'm going to end up purchasing this book and kind of just skimming through it just to see what it covers and what I can learn and glean from more of a practical approach and not just having this very theoretical approach from the previous class. So that's kind of why I'm trying to balance these two. I'm trying to have a practical side to this as well as more of a very theoretical mathematical side. So from there, I'm going to jump into refreshing machine learning. And there was one course that really stuck out to me, which was dealing with machine learning models that have to do with imbalanced data sets, because this is something you run into all the time if you're doing data science models. It was a thing that I ran into the first time I even tried to create something that involved data science, because when you look at something like readmissions for hospitals, most people aren't readmitted, meaning that if you build a model, all the model has to do is really say no to is a patient readmitted or not, and it's 99% of the time right? But obviously you don't care so much about the times where the answer is no, you care more about the time when the answer is yes. So that's something that I'll be curious to see, you know, what this course has to do with it. Because personally, when I was trying to figure it out, I was like stuck gleaning from a ton of different articles and just trying to piece together this concept of, you know, dealing with data that's not perfectly balanced and easy to work with. And then from there, I'm going to start getting ramped up into the whole deploying machine learning models. But in this case, I'm going to focus more on Docker and how you can use Docker to deploy machine learning models, just because I'm curious to see, you know, how people are doing it with a little more of a manual process, so to speak. Again, Docker does take care of some concepts in terms of deployment and DevOps, but I don't think it was necessarily created for MLOps. So I'm curious to see kind of what they teach. And then when I compare that to things like MLOps, you know, what are the other holes that these new tools try to cover that maybe this method didn't do as well as. So that's something I'm going to try to compare, especially like in an article. That's kind of how I think about articles too, is like I try to create content based off of what I'm learning. And so I'm going to try to create content even there where it's like, okay, well, this is the way this course taught it, and this is what these new tools are trying to do. You know, is this better? Is this worse? When would you need to use more of like a Docker format that maybe because it's easier for some things? When would you want to use something like Azure ML or Kubeflow because it's easier for other things? And I don't know the answer right now. I'm going to kind of dig into that in this course and then through the next few courses afterwards, trying to compare it all. All right. On that note, we're also going to look at Kubernetes and really diving into it. So I'm going to take one advanced Kubernetes course and then one free code camp version. Wait. You're not going to forget again to remind these people to like, subscribe, and comment if they're enjoying this video, right? You keep forgetting to do that, and we're really trying to hit 10K like in the next month or two, and if you're not doing it, it's really hard for people to remember. So do you think you can remind them this time? Because we really are trying to include that with every video. What? Oh, yeah, I totally got that this time. Don't you worry, I will not forget to remind them to like and subscribe to this channel. I know we're trying to hit 10K and I know it's new company standards, so I got it this time, don't worry. All right, now that we've got formalities out of the way, let's continue on this whole machine learning plan. And honestly, he made me lose my whole train of thought. Oh yeah, Kubernetes. So again, I'm gonna focus on the free course from Free Code Camp, as well as a paid course, which is more on advanced Kubernetes. I'm curious what they consider advanced. It's always interesting to see what people consider advanced versus, you know, more beginner concepts. So here we're going to just look over the advanced DevOps Kubernetes usage course. Personally, I'm curious to see what they're going to teach us in Helm. I think that's a big area and gap in my own knowledge in terms of how to deploy more complex packages. So I'm curious to see what that covers. And I'm even less familiar with these last three concepts where I'm not even really sure what it's going to cover at all. So again, I'm really excited to kind of dive into those and give you just a heads up on what I'm learning in terms of Kubernetes and what you might need to learn in terms of whether you're an ML engineer, a data engineer, a software engineer, because at the end of the day, all of these roles do tend to have some sort of DevOps layer to them. So having at least a high level understanding of something like Kubernetes, I think is great. Again, I'm going to try this paid course. And then after that, I'm going to focus on learning Kubernetes in under 3 hours with a detailed guide from Free Code Camp, just because they always produce high quality stuff. And honestly, I would love to maybe do a partnership with them one day. So I'm just curious to see what their content looks like. And maybe they'll want to put together something for data engineering in someday in the future. So curious to look at it, curious to see what they expect in terms of these like 3-hour courses. I imagine they cram a lot of information. So I just want to see what they do and what I can learn very quickly. All right, so Now we are in the meat and potatoes of this entire learning map. Again, for me, a lot of this was first to just refresh and then stack on top of knowledge I already have. And now I'm really going to be focusing on learning kind of newer concepts that I'm still trying to understand, like Kubeflow, Azure ML, and Datarobot. All different options, all different tools that probably have some similarities and trade-offs that I need to understand, especially if someone were to ask me which product would work best for them in their overall end-to-end data solution. So to start with, I'm going to look at this article written by Amina, mostly because they end up actually covering a lot more in this article than just the concept of Kubeflow. They actually give you articles to kind of follow as well. They kind of have their own little internal roadmap. So if I scroll down to the bottom, at first they cover some basic information in terms of Kubernetes and where Kubeflow fits. And then they also add in this one section here, which is giving you a good introduction to the concept of Kubeflow. So this is where I'm going to really start. So I can start, again, taking notes, preparing for more of a video version of the course. I like kind of starting with reading because it tends to be a little less hands-on and a little more just trying to actively take in verbal information rather than trying to take in like audio information. So I think it just sticks in a different way. So that's where I'm going to start with. After that, we're going to start taking another article as well. There was one other article that I liked, which was by Google itself. So I wanted to kind of see what they had in terms of getting started with Kubeflow, where it's going to fit into their overall architecture. So again, they've got this whole architecture that we showed earlier from that article, if you remember, and they are even referencing it here, which was kind of the reason Kubeflow kind of came about. So it's meant to kind of make some of this easier. And that's going to be my focus here in the next course, where I'm actually going to focus on learning Kubeflow from none other than Google. So personally, I'm always going to look for courses by companies like Google or Microsoft, especially about their products. In this course in particular, they do a lot in terms of teaching you about ML and AI. Kubeflow only takes about one section of this entire course, but I'm still kind of curious on what they're going to cover in terms of MLOps, because my guess is they're either going to give me enough information here that I can build off of it, or maybe enough information for me not to have to look deeper into more subjects. So if we go down to the bottom and look at this course and what it covers, you will see that it starts out with a pretty basic introduction, which I probably won't be too interested in. It's more about this section here where we talk about productionizing custom ML models. And that's what I'm really interested in. You know, it's about taking ML code, data science models, and then putting it into production. That was something that I think I dealt with in terms of how do I do that when I first started trying to build ML models. And I think that's what I still hear people complaining about these days, because they're not really sure how to go from this model to production code. And that's very hard in terms of making that leap. It's getting easier. It's definitely getting easier, but I still think we're trying to figure out how this all flows. The next section, I'm a little less interested in. In fact, I've written an article about building ML models with SQL before with BigQuery. So it's not generally my favorite thing to do ML with MySQL for some reason. It's just something I never found like it really fit. It might be great and I might need to try it out again. So hopefully maybe this will refresh my mind and maybe even give me a whole new perspective on it. But personally, I've never found things like using fuzzy logic in Microsoft SQL Server or ML models in BigQuery to be things that I like doing. I generally like things to be a little more compartmentalized rather than trying to shove too much into one area. I like things to be a little more functioned out. But again, this course might prove me wrong, so I will obviously come in with an open mind. They then also include Cloud AutoML. I'm curious to see what that's going to do. It's supposedly supposed to make machine learning very easy, almost take care of a lot of the work. We'll see if it actually works outside of their proposed example. So I'll have to actually take it and maybe even try my own data sets against it, see if I can find a data set where it works great and a data set where it works terribly, because that would be, I think, more interesting than anything else. I don't want to just have this perfectly curated data set that works well with their system. I want to find one that breaks their system, and I want to figure out why. That's usually what I'm more curious about. Figuring out the perfect fit is great, but figuring out why things won't fit is also good. And so that's going to cover Kubeflow. Now with that all out of the way, we can look at Azure ML. And most of these courses are actually some sort of preparation for a lot of Azure ML certificates, which I don't generally take a lot of certificate programs just because I haven't personally seen the use of them, but I might have to if I fully take these courses, just because might as well if you go through the whole trouble of taking a course. So just digging into these various courses, let's kind of push in and see what they're going to cover. And I'm going to start with the courses and then I'll go back to the actual article. So first, I'm going to look at Microsoft Azure's Machine Learning Course, again on Coursera. If something is produced by Microsoft about a Microsoft product, I'm likely going to look at it. My guess is it's going to be slightly better than Windows XP, so I should be able to trust it more than likely. And looking at this course, what we'll see, going to the syllabus, is again, they also have something that involves automated ML that Microsoft offers, similar to Google Cloud's AutoML. So I'm going to see probably something similar there in that course. I also am not surprised that they're doing a regression for week 2. That seems to be always a consistent thing where you're always going to learn how to do a regression model on an ML system or ML library. It's kind of like the hello world of machine learning. I'm honestly surprised there isn't an example on the Iris dataset here, and it might be buried in here because, again, the Iris dataset is also another dataset that just always seems to be part of every how-to in terms of machine learning or data science. But they try to go a little more in depth. I guess they do some clustering and classification. If you scroll below, you'll see classification, clustering, again, using Azure AI. So we'll see what that covers. They also have something about the preparation for Azure's AI 900 exam. So I'm curious to see what that is and what I would need to do to prepare for it. Never really done, again, certifications fully all the way. I've always just kind of taken the courses just to see what they are. And I often just find that these fill in the gaps and you don't necessarily need the certification anyways once you have experience. But again, it's nice to kind of have to fill in the gaps, similar to like an MBA after like 5 or 10 years of experience. Next, we're going to focus on an A to Z machine learning course on Udemy. Again, these A to Zs are just so catchy in title names. It's so smart. I don't know why. It just makes me click automatically like, oh, I'm going to learn everything here. But they really do, I think, cover at least a decent amount. I think it's more of a basic course, but I'm excited to kind of see what they have here. There's a ton of sections. Again, they've got 31 hours of lectures here, so I'm curious to see everything that they cover. In particular, I'm very curious about deploying to their web service. I think that's, again, where I'm really curious to see in terms of what I'm going to learn, because that's what I'm focused on. Is like, how am I going to actually deploy these models to actually be pulled later on? Is it some sort of API that I can call to call that model? Is it kind of like a serverless system? How is it all set up? I'm really curious more from a consulting standpoint, how much it's going to cost clients to kind of set up these systems, because again, oftentimes people just want to know, if I pick Azure ML versus something like Kubeflow or maybe something like Datarobot, what is the cost going to be if I need to, make 1,000 calls a day or something like that, or if I need to run on X amount of data. And I need to understand that. I don't think it's going to be in this course exactly. I think that's going to be something I have to look up on my own, where I'm going to have to actually look into Azure ML and the various other companies and services and see what they're charging and how they're charging. Because again, they're all going to charge slightly differently. It's the one thing I hate about cloud, because it's so expensive and pricing is always a little ambiguous. It's usually based off of some number, but sometimes that number just doesn't feel concrete. It's why I currently run a few EC2 instances and a few other things on AWS just to see what it costs me per month. So that way, if a client asks me how much it would cost to run maybe 1 or 2 EC2 instances of a certain size, I can kind of at least give them some sort of framework. Again, going deeper into this, I think another area I'm going to find interesting is the DP100 sections, just to see what they're covering and how I'm actually going to learn to train and push out these models. For example, I think this DP100 deploy and consume the models section is one area I'm going to really like, just to see, again, what are the different components I need to understand in order to deploy a model. Again, huge gap for me in terms of Azure ML, and that's somewhere I'm going to need to fill in and then hopefully share with you guys in a few weeks. So now going back to my MLOps learning plan, I'm going to click back at that first article that I had, and that was predicting gas prices with Azure ML. And so this is more of a blog post, so I'm just going to be curious to read it and condense it and then see where they're all going to take me in terms of external links, because I think that's another interesting way to learn, is see where they link information and if I can glean more from the information that they're trying to link to. Likely this problem in this case is very finely tuned for Azure ML, so it's probably going to work great. And again, it's not going to show me where the problems are in terms of trying to deploy models, but I'm excited to kind of at least look at it and see what someone else wrote about in terms of how they created this experiment, how they kind of built the system, and how I can then take it and then use this whole very GUI based system to create a model. So I think that's what's interesting, is like looking at the system, it looks very much like SSIS or something, where it's very drag and droppy. So I'm curious to see if that's kind of how it works, where you're processing data similarly, and then you're just choosing models to run it through. I imagine that could make some things difficult in terms of tuning and configuring, but we're going to have to figure out that in the next few weeks in terms of how they've actually built it for me to actually try to configure and build systems in the future. So this is where I'm going to really start with, just kind of going through this versus my basic example, and then going through those courses afterwards, because I'm just curious to see what the courses are going to cover that this didn't cover. This is going to leave me with a lot of questions just by reading this article, a lot of gaps of knowledge, and those will hopefully get filled in by the courses. So now we can go back and look at Datarobot, which is kind of the last section I have. Datarobot is a little bit of a newer startup. I mean, they've been around for a while, but I think they just recently got a huge round of funding that puts them in the several, either $1 billion range or maybe even past that. I wrote about that in a recent Substack article about maybe 6 months ago, so I don't recall the exact number that they got funded in, but it was pretty decent in terms of how much. And they also recently partnered with Palantir. So I'm excited to see like how that goes. You know, maybe Palantir will look into purchasing them, because I think Datarobot will fill in a lot of the gaps that Palantir has in terms of actually being able to deploy models and take Palantir away from doing a lot more of this custom consulting approach, which they apparently have, at least based on most people that talk about Palantir as a stock, and turn them more into a product, which is something I think they're still trying to figure out how to like productionize their products and ML models that they've developed over the last few years. And so I'm curious to see in terms of if this partnership with Datarobot and Palantir actually brings some sort of fruit in terms of like helping them deploy models. But with that comes the question, you know, how does Datarobot work? Is it easy to work with? What are the systems and components that I need to understand? And Datarobot has created some courses for this, but they're pretty expensive. They're in the $500 to $1,000 range. And it's not to say that I couldn't afford it, but it's kind of a pain that you have to pay that much to learn a product that you may never ever use. So I'm going to take their free course, which is this MLOps Starter Quest course. And again, you can register for free. So we'll see what it actually is like. It's not very long. So I'm a little concerned about the fact that it's only 2 hours and how much can I possibly learn in 2 hours of courses, but I'll see what they cover. I'll see if it's worth learning more or if it's just not enough for me to be interested in. Going back to the actual roadmap, luckily, someone has put together a white paper on Datarobot. And so this was something that I found really cool, is this person put a pretty in-depth paper in terms of how to understand a Datarobot model. And it really does go in depth in terms of understanding Datarobot, how to understand different like features that they have and products that they have. And I've only really skimmed through it at this point and understanding kind of some of the basic concepts of what they're trying to offer. But I think overall, this looks like a great resource in terms of understanding how to translate some of Datarobot's features. For example, they have things like feature fit, which again, I haven't actually opened up Datarobot, so I'm not really sure where that fits in the whole process, but I'm sure as I read through this article and maybe create like a one-pager based off of this, it will give me a ton of information that I can then glean and share with you guys. And so that's really my 6 to 8 week plan, hopefully. It might be a lot more than 6 to 8 weeks worth of learning. Honestly, I always think I can do so much more in a short period of time than I really can do. So I'm really hoping I can finish this in the next 6 to 8 weeks. You'll kind of be able to follow along as I kind of put out community updates on this whole process. I'm curious to see, again, what I'm going to learn, what maybe gaps that I have that I need to fill in, and what is fully covered in some of these courses. So I'm gonna just put out questions and maybe some notes in terms of what I learned. Oh, I just realized this didn't even load all the way. Let me refresh this. That way you guys can learn with me, and maybe if you like a course, you can take it if it seems interesting. Also, again, I really wanna compare these different components, like what is it like to deploy a model with Docker versus trying to do something with Kubeflow or Datarobot? Are they the same? Are they even used the same way? Can I even replace these tools easily? Or are some of these tools completely different where you can't really plug and play with them? And so that's really important questions that I need to understand. And that's what I'm looking forward to answer, besides learning more about MLOps in general and kind of some of the best practices that I could pick up. And with that, you've now seen my MLOps learning plan for the next few weeks. Hopefully it will help you guys if you're interested in learning more about MLOps and just refreshing your machine learning knowledge. I'm really excited to kind of dig into this. Again, I haven't really taken the time to learn a lot of new concepts in depth recently. I've been focusing more on operational things where you're kind of stuck in this weird rut, focused more on operationally working and learning versus trying to really learn a topic in depth, which usually I find personally, if I'm doing more operational learning, it's just enough learning to push something through and not necessarily enough learning to fully understand a concept. And so that's really this focus of mine, is I really want to dig into this. I really want to create content on this. And that's what I'm going to spend the next few weeks doing. And I'm really excited to share it with you guys. I'm also really excited to see where Datarobot goes. I've been kind of watching it for the last about year, and I'm curious to see kind of how it goes in terms of funding and if it goes public or not. Apparently, it is predicted that the MLOps sector, kind of the service itself, will be worth about $4 billion in the next 3 or 4 years by 2025. So I'm curious to see again if it kind of keeps growing into this area. It really hopefully will make a lot of our deploying of machine learning models simpler. Again, it's interesting seeing this article written back in 2015 by Google talking about this massive problem that many companies are honestly still dealing with today, which is how do you deploy models? And although I think we are doing a much better job than we have in the past, I still find people struggling in terms of how do I deploy my machine learning model? So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to all of you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.